I didn't know that it was meant to be sort of this long, but it seems like it's gathered a lot of grassroots support, and it's crossed over from just about trucking to a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, remember Robert Peel's Principles of Policing? He was the great British police chief who really taught us that in a democracy, police need the consent of the people. If you're imposing laws that people think are unjust, if you're doing it in a capricious way, you're simply not going to have the support of the citizens. Unless you're a police state, you won't be able to do it. And I think that that's really come into play here. You have our version of the FBI, our Mounties are a federal police force that don't have the support of the people on the ground, who are enforcing laws that were not passed to be criminal laws or things like that. They're public health orders with very little science behind them. I mean, seriously, a vaccine mandate for a long-haul trucker, other than someone who works in a lighthouse, I can't think of anything more isolated. Why are you forcing them to get a jab? So I think that a lot of people have said, you know what? We've had enough of this. And I think Canadians are generally pretty respectful of police and of authority. But I think these truckers, there's an independent spirit of truckers, and especially in the prairies in Canada. And I think this is the line in the sand. And incredibly, yesterday, there was this physical showdown, and the Mounties turned tail and left. Now, they're not done. They blockaded the whole village. It's a little village right on the border called Coutts, Alberta. There's 500 men sleeping in their trucks. Like, there's not enough hotels for them. The police have blockaded all the entrances to the village, and it really is a standoff. We've got 2 reporters in there, and we've crowdfunded a lawyer to help represent the truckers to de-escalate things, to negotiate with the cops. And we're on day 4 of that whole thing.
Why there?
Well, it's just one of the border crossings. Remember, this vaccine mandate affects people going back and forth with Canada. And, you know, Canada is a very large country, the second largest country in the world, but about 90% of our population lives within an hour of the U.S. border. So it really is the longest undefended border in the world. Our 2 countries couldn't be more similar, especially those border states and the border provinces. You really wouldn't even know you're in the other country if you didn't see the street signs. So there's so much cross-border traffic, and suddenly, 2 years into this, the same truckers who kept us fed, brought us our personal protection equipment, you know, the truckers who we all relied on for 2 years, suddenly we're punishing them. Suddenly they're not good enough. Suddenly they're dirty people who need to be banned. So it's so abusive. They're working people who have not had the luxury of, you know, working from home on Zoom. You know, they have borne the brunt of everything, and we're turning on them now. I think people have said enough. They're independent, spirited people. Alberta and Montana are very freedom-oriented places. So it's the perfect storm. And speaking of storms, it's minus 20 degrees centigrade out there. It's brutal. Man. So how are you even going to shoo 500 guys out of there? And they're big rigs. Like a tow truck, a regular tow truck can't move some of these massive rigs. Right. I don't even know what the police are going to do.
Right. And meanwhile, they can't get a meeting with Justin Trudeau, who has tucked tail and run. We don't know where he is. He's now saying he has COVID, which is convenient, and thus cannot meet. But he's made very clear on the record he has no desire to meet with any of these truckers to talk about this vaccine mandate. Just for clarity's sake, it forces unvaccinated drivers in Canada to observe a 2-week quarantine and a COVID test before crossing into Canada from the United States. So if you're unvaccinated and you're Canadian or driving a truck, you can't deliver goods to the United States and then come back into Canada. And then the U.S. joined a week after that mandate was passed and said, yeah, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't enter our nation at the Canadian border without showing us a vaccination card. So Americans can go up and come back, but Canadians cannot if they're unvaccinated.
You know, and talk about hurting the supply chain. I mean, what does that word supply chain means? Well, it's how goods get to you from where they started. I mean, it involves ships, it involves trains, but pretty much the last leg of any journey for any produce, anything in a retail store comes by truck. If odds are, if it's a thing, it was on a truck. So imagine wiping out 10, 20, 30% of all trucking because you're trying to, I mean, this is not a public health rationale here. This is about obedience and compliance. And I think you mentioned that Trudeau won't even meet with them. I think Trudeau wants to demonize these people, to use them as a foil. They're grubby, working class, blue collar people who aren't fancy, and they're the enemies. He's trying to whip up this fear that they're violent. He's called them racist. By the way, a lot of truckers in Canada are visible minorities. There's a large Sikh community in trucking. I'd say probably 20 or 30% of all truckers, and Indigenous people. Like, it's so weird that he's calling them racist. That's sort of his go-to card.
Yes.
And he's calling them violent. He's trying to paint them as like January 6th rioters or something. They're not.
Yes. He's only got that one card. He calls everybody names. If you're not fully in support of LGBTQ, ABC, FY, I have no idea, then you're not as woke as Justin, and therefore you are to be judged. Here he is the other day, for the viewers who haven't yet heard it. It's really a despicable soundbite, and it's based on nothing as far as we can see. Justin Trudeau on the truckers.
I have attended protests and rallies in the past. When I agreed with the goals, when I supported the people expressing their concerns and their issues. Black Lives Matter is an excellent example of that. But I have also chosen to not go anywhere near protests that have expressed hateful rhetoric, violence towards fellow citizens.
Okay, so we looked.
Megyn, I got to tell you that
we looked for the evidence.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we looked for the evidence. This is what we found. Someone had a Canadian flag with a swastika on it. Well, that's not good. That would be the entirety of the evidence that these are a bunch of racists. So he's dismissing thousands. I mean, today it's 500 trucks, but he's dismissing thousands of people who are out there protesting as racists because of one guy with a flag. That's not going to work.
And he also said the word violence, which is a whole other thing. And I should tell you, I was in Ottawa for the first 2 days of that big trucker convoy there. Police did not arrest a single person. They did not lay a single charge. So when Trudeau says there was violence, he's making that up out of whole cloth. And by the way, even if there was one person or two people who were violent, that does not discredit the other 50 to 100,000 truckers who did converge on Ottawa. And the million people, literally a million, across Canada who came out to cheer the truckers on at the side of the highway, at overpasses. This is the first massive, authentic, organic, natural uprising, maybe in Canadian history. No political party backed this. It was almost leaderless. There was a GoFundMe for some organizers, but I'm not even sure if those funds have been released. This was so real. And because no one in the establishment had access to it, they were all sort of panicked, even the leader of the Conservative Party opposition. By the way, he was ousted. The leader of the Conservative Party in Canada was ousted today, in large part because he would not embrace this democratic, populist, conservative movement. It's This trucker convoy has already had amazing impacts. The province of Quebec was planning on taxing people who did not get the vaccine. Yesterday, they withdrew that. This trucking convoy has done more for freedom than any politician in Canada. Last point, there's an Angus Reid poll, which is a large pollster in Canada, showed that in the last week, polls have moved 15% more towards ending the lockdowns. Well, what could that possibly be other than these truckers? These truckers are saving the country. It's what Orwell wrote in his book, 1984. If there's any hope, it lies with the proles. God bless the truckers who are freeing the frozen north.